Hi everyone, I hope you're well. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Husnara, the Associate Coach and Editor of Cheeky Little Careers. I'm delighted to say that for my next video interview, I've been joined by Daniel Lowe, who works as a private equity lawyer at UBS. And Cheeky Little Careers has gone global as well, because Daniel, you're based out in Singapore, aren't you?
Yes, very hot over here.
Lucky you, because it's utterly miserable down here. So why don't you start by giving our viewers a bit of an overview of your career, because I've had a look at, because we've not really sort of known each other, because a lot of other interviews I've done recently have been with my long-term contacts. So I spotted you on LinkedIn and thought, wow, really fascinating. Must pin this guy down and chat to him, because you have quite an unusual career path, don't you?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say that it's usual by any means, but yeah, in short, basically I'm from Toronto originally. So I attended law school actually in the UK. I did my degree at Birmingham and wrote my LPC. And then after that, I went back to Toronto. I completed my LLM in securities law at the University of Toronto again. And then I worked 2 years before I went onto a training contract in investment bank in a kind of quasi-legal role, doing derivatives negotiations. And I did that for 2 years until I secured a training contract out in Calgary, Alberta, becoming basically an oil and gas lawyer for the first, I guess, like year of practice. I stayed on as a 1 PQE. So that was unique because I think it was weird to see a Chinese lawyer wearing a cowboy hat, cowboy boots. So it's definitely unique in that sense. But then after that stint, I decided to move to Hong Kong and I joined a private equity firm working in-house. Did that for 2 years and then have recently moved to Singapore and jumped into an offshore practice, practicing investment funds and direct investments, practicing Cayman Islands and BVI law. And as you said, most recently, I've joined UBS here on the investment fund side.
Okay. And what motivated you to become a lawyer?
Um, I, I think a few things, but I think initially when I was young, I was watching a lot of these dramas, TV dramas from Hong Kong, and they're all police dramas. So growing up, I think every Hong Kong youngster really wanted to be a police officer because they were cool, they had guns and everything. But I remember every time they kind of cut to the court scenes, these lawyers would come in and super sophisticated. They knew all the answers to questions. And I think at that point, I was like, oh, mom, what do they do? Wearing these kind of weird wigs. And they're like, oh, those are barristers, those are lawyers. And I think at that point, it kind of sparked that interest in me to explore more.
Mm. And you have had an unusual career path, as you've highlighted, and as I've mentioned as well. What did you have to do to get your first lucky break? Because so many people listening to this interview or watching it even will be saying that, especially in this current sort of pandemic climate, that getting that training contract and getting that, your foot in the door is such a challenge.
Mm, yeah. So the thing is that my path has been rather long. I think I call myself a late bloomer. So by the time I graduated my LPC and went back to Canada and everything,
Mm.
it took me 5 years to land to actually qualify as a solicitor and barrister. So during that time, I think like I said, I filled in and did kind of a 2 year stint as a contracts negotiator. I did my LLM. I I tried to kind of keep busy, but like continuously build my CV.
Mm.
It was tough because after my LLM, even I applied to law firms and I didn't get any bites whatsoever.
Wow. Okay.
So at that point, I'm thinking, why did I waste my past year doing this if I wasn't going to get interviews? So I think it's just constantly kind of having to push on and think like, hey, what else can I do to better my CV? What
Mm.
else can I do to kind of stack myself against my peers?
Mm.
And after 4 years, finally landed something.
How did you keep yourself motivated? Because I don't know whether I could keep going for 4 years. And did you ever feel like you wanted to throw the towel in?
Definitely. I think I gave myself a timeline. I think I told myself like 5, 6 years. If I can't secure anything after that, I might just give it in and just, I don't know, like apply at a bank, work at a bank or something. Um, but I did give myself a timeline only because I'm optimistic, but I'm not delusional.
Mm.
Sometimes it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be, but I do have to give it all my all. And I think I told myself I owe myself that. I owe my parents that. I owe my friends that to give them my all to at least after 6 years say, listen, guys, I did everything I could. Moving on here.
Mm. But what you did, I think, which I'm sure helped, is that rather than just plugging away, filling in application form after application form to the same firms. It sounds as though you were checking in with yourself to see, okay, what can I do to make sure that then for the next round of applications, I've bettered my CV. What can I add to my CV to give myself a fighting chance to get that initial sort of foot in the door? Whereas I think some aspiring lawyers I come across, what they'll do is make lots of application forms, and it's that classic, if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same result.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. I think what I do is when I was doing applications, I had a folder for each year that I do it. And say 2020, I would blackline against my CV from 2019 and see what changes I've done in terms of typography, but also what new experience have I done? What new interests have I added in there? If it remains exactly the same or very little, I knew I wasted my past year. So in order to kind of combat that, I kind of foresee, say 2021, I would make a mock CV and to type in things I want to see done. If I want to complete the New York bar by next year, I will write in completed New York bar, June 2021. It's something for me to kind of aspire to. It's like a visualization exercise. But you're right. If you have nothing to show for it, what's to say for the employer to pull up your past CV and your current CV? They'll say the same thing. I haven't seen any improvement whatsoever. Why would I consider you?
Yeah. Now I see that, or I hear that question being asked quite a lot. Is it worth my while applying to the same firm again during this round of applications? And my argument has always been no, unless there's been clear water between your last application and your more recent one. Because if you're filling in the same answers using the same examples, then I question whether that's going to make any difference. So I think keeping that review, I love that idea of comparing your CVs from previous years. And I like that sort of visualization exercise and making those statements of intent, by 2020, I will have completed my MBA, my master's, whatever, so that, you're more likely to stick with that, I think, rather than having vague, ambiguous sets of goals that are just a bit too broad.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you find the early years of your career as a lawyer?
I'm not gonna lie, it was tough. I think when I was doing my training contract, my principal at the time told me, "Your first 4 years are gonna suck." I'm not gonna lie, you're gonna find it hard in terms of steep learning curve, adjusting to a law firm environment, learning how to do billables and read your actualization and realization rates. These are all things you're gonna have to learn, but you're gonna have to learn really quickly. And dealing with kind of like time crunch and whatnot that you have to deal with as private practice. So I found that pretty tough because I wasn't mentally ready for that. And I think because I wasn't mentally ready for that, a lot of my personal life and my work-life balance went to shambles. I focused a lot on the work and I neglected my own health. I neglected my relationships. And I think even now as a 5 PQE, I'm starting to kind of recover in terms of relationships and whatnot. But I do regret not striking a balance early on.
What advice would you give to anyone who's, experiencing similar sort of concerns?
I think have certain things that allow you to disconnect. So whatever it is, if you meditate or you go to the gym, even if you have a deadline coming up and you have to work till 9 p.m., but usually you go to the gym at 5 p.m., delay your gym or go earlier. Don't cancel it entirely.
Yeah.
I think that's really dangerous because once you do that and it becomes a trend, you've clearly chosen work over your own life. As important work is, you don't live to work, you work to live. So I think keeping that in mind and carving that time out for yourself, whatever it is.
No, I think lawyers have this habit of being people pleasers, and they struggle to say no. They struggle to manage expectations. And I think that's not sustainable. I think that it's absolutely fine to say no. And there are, polite ways of doing that without, damaging your career beyond repair. And you're right. Sometimes it might be as simple as doing things in a different order.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that you won't get it done. It's just doing it based on your timetable.
Yeah, no, agreed. And, we have to talk about sort of being an international lawyer. Is there a country where you haven't worked, where you haven't lived?
Plenty. There's plenty, and there's plenty more that I do want to work still. So I've worked in Canada, but I'm from Canada, but recently Hong Kong and Singapore. So I've loved both cities. I think I'm a big foodie, so that's why I chose these two cities. They're known for their culinary cuisines and variety. So there's that. But I have considered in the past going to Dubai as well, just because yeah, the Middle East has always fascinated me.
Mm. What's it like working as a lawyer in Singapore?
Um, I think it's very similar to Hong Kong. Both cities are always pitted against each other,
Mm.
but I think Singapore is a tad bit more slow paced compared to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
You can even see it in the escalators in Hong Kong. They go at lightning speeds. So if you like wrong footing and you're gonna fall. So I think it really speaks to the culture there in Hong Kong. The work culture is really strong.
Mm.
But yeah, Singapore here, I think the people work fairly late as well, pushing to midnight and whatnot at
Yeah.
law firms.
And as a legal hub, are there particular practice areas that are more prominent in Singapore, or could you work in any area of your choosing?
I think if you want to transition as a foreign lawyer, say like a London lawyer into the
Mm.
Singapore market,
Yeah.
certain practices are much easier. So say corporate practices,
Yeah.
M&A, private
Agreed.
equity, banking, finance, less so family law or criminal law, those kind of
Yeah.
areas.
Yeah. No, I think that it's got to have some kind of international angle.
Mm.
And do you think you'll move to Dubai anytime soon? Although I doubt you
Uh,
would admit that because you would be putting UBS on alert.
and you know what? They have an office there too, so who knows? But I think, right now I think very happy with Singapore. I love the travel too, because before COVID, you could take a long weekend and go to Bali, go to Bangkok for the
Yeah.
weekend. So that's, I'm hoping to start that again in 2021. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed.
I have to say that Southeast Asia is probably one of my favorite places to go traveling.
Yeah.
Um,
What's your favorite place?
well, at the start of 2020, in fact, we started 2020 in Thailand.
Ah, brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay.
it feels like a very distant memory, sadly, but yeah, absolutely loved it. Beautiful, amazing food.
Yeah, oh,
In
yeah, the
fact, I
food all
just
the
could
time.
not get enough of Thai food, and I can't. And I'm quite good at cooking, but unfortunately, I just cannot master food from this region.
I'll give
Whether it's
you
Chinese, whether it's Thai.
so I think the Thai and Vietnamese, the secret is fish sauce. That's all it is.
Right, so that's where I'm going wrong. Got you. Okay. Anyway, let's go back to talking about law because people will be wondering whether they've tuned into the wrong program. But what do you think has been? I think that there's a real mismatch between perception and reality. The way that law firms sell the legal profession as a career option for students and what it's like on the ground. What do you wish you knew before you decided to pursue a career in law? And has it met your expectations? Because I know that your idea of being a lawyer was wandering around with a gun, being a policeman,
Yeah,
and then possibly wearing a wig. And of course, you're not a barrister with a
not at all.
solicitor.
Um, I think the one thing that I would clarify or like shed light on is that there are multiple paths in law. I
Mm,
think that the
agreed.
traditional path is, you do your training contract, you stay at a firm for 15 years, you make partner, and then now there's income partner, but back then it was just equity partner, and that's it. That's your life. If you make a transition, it's maybe at a 25-year mark, you go into in-house, become a GC. There's a lot more options nowadays, and I think not many people talk about it. So for instance, a lot of in-house positions are taking, 2 or 3 PQE lawyers, much more junior than back then. Why is that? Because like a lot of the in-house departments have the budget for this, and they would rather hire young associates so they can develop them into business leaders later on. Why are we not talking about these things at law school? Because I guess, the banks and whatnot, don't have much sway versus the law firms at the law
Mm.
schools. But also like areas like legal tech, some students that graduate law school, even after finishing the training contract, don't necessarily want to practice, but they want to stay on the periphery of law. Why can't they pursue legal tech or legal design? These are areas that are growing right now.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think that the problem is that there does seem to be a fair bit of peer pressure when you're at law school as well, that there's only that one path. That I certainly encountered that when I was at university, that you've got to get into a magic circle law firm, otherwise you're somehow deemed a failure.
Yeah.
And I think as I've grown older and I've got a bit more sort of life experience, I've quickly realized that success can mean lots of different things to different people. And as you've highlighted with your career path, that there is more than one way to achieve success and to reach your goals.
Mm.
And I think that if I had one piece of advice for aspiring lawyers watching this video is, and I think, in fact, I'm stealing what our most recent role model, who's a lawyer at McFarlane's, Elia Datu, she said, it's really important to forge your own path.
Mm.
And that's something you should define and not feel that everyone else is dictating that to you. What do you think?
I completely agree.
Yeah.
But I guess the trouble is when you're young, your mind's all over the place. It's hard to kind of sit down and to
It's
define.
those hormones.
Yeah, exactly. How do you define what your values are? You haven't seen enough of the world. But I think there's a really great book that I'm reading right now. It's called Design Your Life by Bill Burnett. It talks about like design theory, but how you apply to planning your life. And I think initially they talk about having a compass, a moral, not a values-based compass on where you want to lead yourself. So you don't know what the end destination is, but you know what you value. So say, for instance, you value giving or like kind of like philanthropic kind of work. Would doing a strictly corporate role fulfill that need for you, or would doing more kind of like pro bono work or family law work, will that jive more with your values?
Yeah.
So having kind of like a conversation with yourself, sitting down and defining what values define you versus what someone will define for you.
Yeah. It's worth highlighting that your values can change. And I think mine did change. I think that it's fine for that moral compass to shift as you get older.
Hmm.
For me, it probably coincided with having a bit of a midlife crisis, frankly. Anyway, we won't reveal how old I am, but most people can figure it out when they see what year I graduated from university. And there's a big clue that I've not had any gap years. So let's talk about more sort of recent experiences. Have you found the past year and living through a pandemic?
It's a bit of up and down. I think
Mm,
initially the novelty about it was interesting. Working from home, I know that I was always wanting a more kind of balance between work at home and work at the office. So I was
mm,
really liking it. But then 2, 3 months in, I start to feel the isolation. Not seeing anyone and having only limited interaction on Zoom, on Skype and whatnot. So I think that really did impact my mental wellness. And I think that's the same time that I actually picked up meditation. I'm on my Headspace app a lot now. Um, and I really do find that helps me kind of settle, even when it's stressful or I'm anxious.
mm.
But yeah, I think it's really big up and down. And I've just been really missing the interactions I get with real people one-on-one.
Yeah. And how is it impacting on the sort of work you're actually doing at the moment? Because there are a lot of worried lawyers out there, because if you listen to the news, and more specifically the news on the economy, it makes for pretty grim reading, frankly, or grim listening even.
Mm,
But as I've said in previous interviews, I think this crisis does feel quite different to the 2008 crisis,
mm,
um, because the cause of it is different. And even this morning, the banks are saying, or the banks here over here, that they can take a bit of a hit. I think they've had to really shore up their sort of liquidity, etc., or whatever the phrase is, to
mm,
make sure that they could, obviously they've been scrutinized a lot more with all these stress tests, etc.
yeah.
So I think there's reason to be optimism, and depending on what area of law you specialize in, I'm getting the sense that some lawyers are busier than ever before, but others are a bit quieter. What's your experience been?
So I think yeah, I think you're right. This is a bit different than the 2008 crisis, whereas this is kind of like an act of God, if you will. But I do see that a lot of industries, certainly say in the tech industry, it's been an area it was booming before, but even now more so
Mm,
because everything's online, it's tech-based. I know in Singapore particularly, the tech companies are doing very well, especially the fintech side. So that has not stopped. Investments are still going on. So I think it really depends on the area that you want to capitalize on. So for instance, reg tech, all tech, but like regulatory tech or education tech, these are all kind of booming in a sense. So if you're a lawyer that's versatile, that's willing to kind of adjust and adapt to say like more technology focused practice, I think you'll do fine, especially during kind of post-COVID world.
yeah, I agree. I think that any savvy junior lawyer who is coming up to qualify, they're at the final stages of their training contract, or those who are yet to enter the profession, it's worth sitting down and thinking, okay, what practice areas are going to be booming when they join? And I think that if you're a student, then you need to take a much more long-term view, because if you think about it, you won't start your training contract probably for another 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then you've got 2 years of training. And given how rapidly the world of work is changing and how quickly technology is advancing, it's almost impossible to say what areas are going to be, on vogue, I think, in 5
Yeah.
years' time. That said, I think we are in that sort of technological sort of era. So I think anything relating to tech is going to be popular. As you say, sort of financial regulations is going to be good. Education is not one that I'd heard of, so that's quite interesting.
And I think with education, it's mainly because of COVID right now. You're seeing a lot of people
Yeah.
jumping on, kind of remotely, remote teaching.
Mm, mm. Yeah, no, agreed. I should know because my husband's a teacher. But yeah, so I think for students listening to this, I don't think you need to be overly hung up right now about what practice areas you're going to eventually specialize in. But I think it's better I would recommend exploring it in sort of more broad brush approaches. Do you want to be a lawyer doing deals, or do you see
Yep.
yourself more as a sort of litigator because you prefer advocacy and would want to be in court? Or do you want a slightly slower pace in life, and therefore perhaps an advisory area like financial regulation could be preferable? I think the other big decision that students need to make is whether you go down that commercial route, and that doesn't necessarily mean you have to work in the city, or you go down that non-commercial route, which would cover areas like family law, crime, etc. So what's 2021 looking like for you then?
2021 is good. So I've been at UBS for 6 months so far. So I'm loving my time here.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping to get more involved, go back to the office and meet people. But for me, I'm doing a few initiatives on the side right now. So as you know, you saw me on LinkedIn. So I do a lot of one-on-one mentoring. I recently started a career strategy kind of mentorship service, providing law students and junior lawyers. But I'm also helping a few other kind of law students here create a platform and launching a platform in Singapore that is meant to kind of connect law students and Singapore professionals in the legal industry here, kind of like a private LinkedIn. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, a lot of things going on, but this is kind of, once again, jiving back with my values-driven compass about giving back. And this is, it provides me with that satisfaction, I guess, that I may not get at a strictly kind of like corporate role.
That's really interesting, because I agree in that I think what some people try to do is achieve everything through that one job. And you may find that you need to be participate in a few different activities to then live by all of those values that you hold on to. And some can be achieved through volunteering, some can be achieved through hobbies and interests. So I think that to look for that one job that delivers on everything, some people get it, and lucky them, but I think
Yeah,
most people will have to pursue numerous different activities to complete that circle.
yeah.
You're into sort of supporting students. It's interesting that you've mentioned this LinkedIn for students in Singapore. Let's talk about networking, one of my pet topics. What tips, because I find that some people take a slightly clumsy approach to networking, and I do think that it's a bit of an art. What tips do you have for students or junior lawyers listening to this, thinking, I don't really know anyone of significance, or I feel awkward approaching people because I don't have anything in common with them? They might ask me a question about the law that I don't know how to answer. That's something that came up a couple of days ago. What would you say to them? What advice do you have to become an effective networker?
So I think, especially during this time during COVID, a lot of things have been kind of diverted online. So I think
Agreed.
even going forward, we're going to rely on a lot more kind of on social media platforms like LinkedIn. So I think I have like a 3-stage approach for people that want to engage and network on LinkedIn. I think the first stage is increase your engagements. So what that means is you can like someone's post, share someone's post, these kind of small engagements. Naturally, if you do these things, your network is going to see that you're engaging in certain content. So say you want to get into employment law and you like a lot of employment law posts and whatnot, people will make that inference about you to say, oh, Husnara is actually interested in employment law. That's interesting, right? Then moving on to like a second stage, I would use LinkedIn as a platform to engage with people on a personal level. So messaging people, adding people, not being afraid to add people, because if you want to add friends, you can use friends, Facebook, or you can use Instagram, but LinkedIn is meant to create connections, even if they're cold call connections. So use that as the kind of a conduit for you to do that,
Mm,
and message people like for us, even setting up, hey, I see that you're doing something really interesting with Cheeky Little Careers. I'd love to chat with you about it on a
mm,
20-minute Zoom call. Do you have time? I think most of the times, if you kind of ask someone, I would love to hear your story because it's something that I want to pursue as well.
yeah,
They're hard pressed to say no. I think they're more likely going to say yes because it's just telling the story, and who doesn't like to tell their own story, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I think that the point you made about liking and commenting on content, you don't need to write your own content, because a lot of people are really afraid of writing, thinking they can't write, they don't have time to write.
Mm,
And it's interesting, isn't it, that that's exactly how I found you, because I thought, Daniel seems to be quite interested in all things careers related. So
mm,
it was pretty obvious that if I approached you to talk about careers and cheeky little careers, more to the point, that you're more likely to accept my connection request. So I think that you can give really quite strong hints to people in your network or in your potential network what your sort of key interests are by having some kind of pattern in the types of content you like and comment on. And that's how I've done it, because I think if people watch my LinkedIn activity, it's pretty obvious what
mhm,
things appeal to me. And we won't have time to go into this, but it's part of my personal brand, because what I want is people to associate me with all things careers related. I also talk a hell of a lot on LinkedIn about diversity, because that's, I'm a real sort of advocate for D&I in the legal sector. So I agree with you. The one thing I would say is, when you do cold call contacts, or send them invitations to join your LinkedIn network, please, please, please add a personal message.
agreed.
Especially if it's really unclear as to why I would accept your connection request. As you can imagine, in my line of work, I get absolutely inundated, and I'm more likely to accept a connection request because I think there's some common ground. So usually the connection and the overlap is law.
Mm,
Um, and then beyond that, it'd be something careers related. The only other thing I would say when it comes to networking and asking people for favors is, and this is really important, is making sure that what you're asking is reasonable. Put yourself in the other person's shoes, um, and see whether, if the approach was made the other way, how would you react
mm,
if you were asked that, to do that favor, sort of thing. I think a bit of audacity is good, and you do need to be brave. And the other question I always get sort of students and lawyers I speak to is, ask yourself this very basic question: what's the worst that's going to happen?
yeah.
It'll probably just, I don't think the person would be that bad that they'd report you as a spammer.
No, but the worst thing is they ignore it, right? And
Precisely.
part of this is a numbers game.
Precisely, yeah. So no, I agree. I think that it's a bit of a numbers game. I think that it was interesting you also mentioned the differences between what LinkedIn is there to do and what you should be using Facebook for, and even Instagram. I know Instagram straddles now, and I think there are
Mm,
quite a lot of corporate accounts on Instagram, but I have that real divide. LinkedIn for me is a professional networking site, and therefore the content I post on there has to be relating to my sort of professional endeavors.
yeah, yeah, I agree.
So what other advice, before we wrap up, what other advice do you have for lawyers at the moment who are either sort of feeling a bit down in the dumps, students kind of struggling to secure those all important internships, vacation schemes, etc.?
Um, I think um, I think be brave. I think be brave during this time. I think it's hard because everyone thinks, well, there's no positions out there, no, there's nothing much I can do. But put yourself out there. If you want to create something, create a platform, do it. If you want to speak to someone that you don't normally speak to, message them. I think doing this will definitely help your brand as well. So I think definitely be brave and I mean, like reach out to the community on LinkedIn. You'll be surprised how open the lawyers are on LinkedIn. And I was surprised too when you reached out to me and when other lawyers reached out. And I often post about kind of like stories of the past, vulnerability stories or failure stories. And they would give such great encouragement. And I didn't think that a platform could provide me with such a kind of a supportive network. So use the resources out there and be brave.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that those one-to-one conversations are so much more impactful because my worry is that since the world moved online and there are so many virtual events going on, that some of the panelists at these events are I think personally, are just a bit too on message. Everything is
Yes.
overly sugar-coated. And it's interesting you mentioned the sort of vulnerabilities and the triumphs over adversities. I think I just hope that one of the changes we see in 2021 is that there's a bit more transparency about what a career in law, especially in commercial law, whether that's working in, Singapore, which is obviously a significant, financial hub, or in London or in Hong Kong, that people are more open and transparent about what it involves,
Mm,
and not be afraid to, as you say, show a bit of vulnerability and
yeah.
say that it's fine. Because I think it's those stories that spur people on more than anything. If you say, yeah, it was all very easy for me, then where's I just don't find that particularly helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's most of the time they're lying to themselves. It was not easy, but they want the impression to seem like it's easy. So I agree. Being vulnerable and being open about that.
Yeah. Do you think it's because, I promise you we will finish in a minute, but I have to ask you this. Do you think this is really a result of lawyers trying to be perfectionists?
I think so. I think perfectionists, but also the image that they put out. I think the traditional way of personal branding that law firms have taught us is you need to be spick and span, clean, perfect on paper. That's the only way to brand yourself. And
Mm,
you see traditional lawyers, their only posts are basically saying, "Oh, I made it to Chambers top list and this and that." I mean, that's great, but it doesn't really add any value to the reader. Um,
agreed.
and it doesn't show me who you are as a person. And
Mm,
for me, like selecting a lawyer and whatnot, I do want to find out who you are versus being a lawyer, because I'm assuming every lawyer can do pretty much the same thing, but
mm.
how are you as a person?
Yeah. No, I think that it's those stories, isn't it, that people are interested in. Um, and you're right in that a lot of the posts just become blurred into one big fat one about who's won an award. And
Mm,
I was thinking the other day when I was looking on LinkedIn, you can seem to get an award for everything.
yes.
And it
Yeah.
kind of dilutes the sort of, the kudos associated with winning an award or getting ranked in. There are now so many directories. There is literally an award for everything. Um, but no, anyway, on that, on that, sorry, maybe I should let you say something just to finish and wrap up. Go on.
Uh, uh,
Any closing remarks?
No closing remarks. Just thank you for having me on this chat. I love what you've done with the website, and
Thank
I
you.
just hope that a lot of students here and junior lawyers uh, understand that things will pass, COVID will pass, but your career will keep going. So keep building that and just keep on it and have some resilience and grit.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and all the best for 2021.
Thank you. You too.